All right, good evening, Crypt Keepers, and welcome to Cryptique, where Ryan and I discuss all things paranormal, occult, UFOs, metaphysical, hidden history, forbidden archaeology, and all things truther. And I've got about 100 more of those if you're interested in hearing about it. I'm joined, as always, by my podcast partner on this journey through the universe, Ryan. How you doing?
I'm doing well. As promised, I'm on my steroid-infused antibiotic still. I have my gigantic Red Bull. I'm ready to go.
Well, and
how's everything going over there?
It's going good, but I do think that we should tell people that we're recording this episode just a couple days after we recorded the Dream Killer episode. So it's not like you've been on steroids for a month now.
No, I'm just still. I'm getting over the last. Well, I'm just finishing out the medicine for strep, which is so weird. Getting strep as an adult is weird. It's like when they told me that, it's like I don't think I've had that in 20 years.
Yeah.
What are you talking about, strep?
Yeah, I thought I was done with that. It's a kid's illness.
Right.
All right. Well, we
get out of here.
Yeah. All right. We got to get into it. So tell them what they need to know real quick.
Yeah, if you guys want to help us, you can interact with the show on whatever your platform of choice is. You can share it with somebody you think will like it. We really would appreciate it if you tell us what you like, don't like, suggestions, corrections. All that stuff can be sent to cryptiquepodcast@gmail.com. You can check out what we're selling over at cryptiquepodcaststore.com. And as always, you can help us out with server costs, with Red Bull costs, with antibiotic costs at buymeacoffee.com/cryptiquepi.
Sounds good. You're first up tonight. What you got for us?
I have the first serial killer in the Philippines. As far as I'm aware, as far as I can tell, this is the first, it's at least the first documented.
Right.
But as we know, a lot of the time when we're talking about areas that were colonized, the documented history really begins whenever the colonizers came in.
True.
And in this case, in the Philippines, it was the Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
So back in the 1800s, very early 1800s, between the dates I'm seeing are 1804 and 1810, because the records are not great.
Right.
There was a peaceful town called Pampanga. Pampanga. That's the pronunciation I got from Google when I typed this in, because it's like, I should be prepared.
Sounds right.
And then it said it, and it's like, I don't know if that sounds right to me. But this was apparently a very peaceful, tranquil town, and was just shaken by a series of murders that went down in history as the first set of serial killings in this entire region. And was
crazy.
Just like totally unheard of. So, I mean, we're talking early 1800s Philippines. It was a simpler time, a little bit more superstitious. There was a lot of belief in magic and spirits and things like that. And all of a sudden, bodies start showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a wave of fear and worry and anxiety among Spaniards and Filipinos alike.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody really knew what was going on. There was no rhyme or reason, no obvious connection between the victims or anything that was going on. Some of the sources refer to them as grisly murders, but there's unfortunately no record of how these were committed. There's no MO or anything that's listed. And you even mentioned in some of your notes about this that there's, we're in an area of time well before news that would have covered this particularly well. Right. There's no true crime podcast. There's nobody like us covering this back then. It's like, have you heard about what's going on over in this area?
Yeah.
So the colonial police are just scrambling, trying to figure out what's going on. And more people are falling victim to the serial killer who, again, no connection. Nobody can figure out what's going on. Over the span of a decade, so that's a long career for a serial killer.
Yeah.
Approximately 50 people were killed in different parts of this region. I think Magalong is the town and Pampanga is the overall, I think it's more like what we would consider a county.
Yeah.
So it spanned a fairly large area, and despite their best efforts, the authorities and police were left totally baffled. The communities were on edge because they just had no idea what was going on. No motive, no notes, no nothing. And with no clues or suspects, the case was initially thought to be unsolvable. So just leaving this peaceful area to be well, I guess there's a serial killer out there who's, they're hitting about 10 people a year. So There's
Wow.
probably some lunatic out there like me who's like, okay, there are how many people in this town? What are my odds of being one of these?
Right, that's what I was gonna say. It's not like it's New York City and 50 people disappeared, because that could
Right.
happen in the course of a week or two. We're talking about villages where everybody knows each other, very, sparsely populated, even though the Philippines is super crowded now. I have to imagine back then it was a lot less populated. So we're talking about a pretty high percentage of people that are, going
Well, the
missing.
Philippines is primarily an archipelago, right? Isn't it all just small islands?
Pretty much. I mean, there's a couple big islands, but there's thousands of small islands and
Yeah, so
thousands
you
of
would think a
islands that
lot of
have no
these,
humans.
yeah, and a lot of these smaller islands, I think it's useful to point that out that there are probably a lot of really small, isolated communities who are like, "What's going on?
Absolutely.
Somebody died on this island over here, and now somebody died on this one over here. Like, what's happening?"
Right. Yeah.
All right, so little did anybody suspect to start, the perpetrator was a fairly well-known public figure, Father Juan Severino Malari. Or
Oh,
Mallory. I'm not sure how it's supposed to be pronounced because this is a Filipino. It's not a Spaniard.
right.
But this was a respected, well known priest in the area and was, I mean, literally the last person you would suspect of something like this, especially in the 1800s.
Right.
Um, he was well known for just being a good priest in general. He was well known to be artistic and have a lot of talent. He was one of the first people to uh, master calligraphy in this area. You know, there's writing about how some of the documents that his church used were so beautiful because he would actually go in by hand and do this work himself, kind of like an old school monk. If you're thinking about like illuminated manuscripts and things like that.
Right.
Also interesting is that he was kind of he was an interesting success story because he was rejected multiple times when he was trying to become a priest. But he wound up becoming the first Filipino to preside over a parish in this area. Because at the
Big
time it was
deal.
all the Spaniards. The Spaniards were the ones that were kind of bringing this religion in, and they were the ones presiding over it. Yeah, so it was a big deal that at this time the Spanish totally held sway over this area, over the religion, over society, and this guy came in and was actually able to become part of it himself.
Yeah.
So he was a spiritual leader. He was important. He was the first Filipino to get into this position, probably a point of pride for a lot of people in the area. So it's just super shocking, bizarre that he was found to have done this. I mean, he was basically like an artist, that he's described as being gentle and things like that. But it's just, yeah, it's odd. And there's still no information on exactly how he was doing this, but there is speculation as to why. So, mental illness is one of the things that we always bring up. There is speculation that that this really started with a belief, a local superstitious belief that his mother had been cursed using some kind of black magic. I looked more into that, and there are some words that just look like somebody threw a bunch of Scrabble tiles on the ground, so I'm not going to try to say them. But essentially, he thought that his mother's, or like essentially her soul was like trapped and was subject to the whims of whoever had cursed her.
Yeah.
And somehow he had possibly come to the conclusion that he could reverse this by taking lives. And being a priest and being trusted, he had access to a lot of people. A lot of people never would have suspected somebody like him. A lot of people would have been coming to the church. So he had his pick of victims. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
so obviously, you don't just go into that. So he probably did have some kind of psychosis, some kind of mental condition going on.
Yeah.
I mean, even today, we don't understand or sympathize with that kind of thing very well. So 200 years ago in colonial era Philippines, they would have attributed a lot of mental illness to supernatural forces, superstitions, spirits, things like that on both sides. The Spanish would have been saying, well, these guys are just, they'll believe anything.
Yeah.
And then on the Filipino side, they would have said, well, what's mental illness? I've never heard of that. This guy's being influenced by something, or somebody's put some kind of curse on him.
For sure.
Yeah, it was just still a lot of superstition and essentially ignorance by being isolated and all that at that time. Just, mental health help had not made it there.
He hadn't heard about the sleepwalking defense yet.
Right, yeah. So the way he was caught is kind of interesting. So his mother was ill and he believed cursed. And about 10 years after he started this, he fell ill. And it was when some of the parishioners came to visit him that they discovered, they don't say what, but they said a collection of bloody items that very clearly link him to these murders.
Yeah.
You know, it's not something that they expected to find. It's like, oh, let's go bring some soup to Father Mallory. And then they're like, oh my God, he's got like a Dexter box of like blood slides and trophies from all these victims. And yeah, that was what got him caught and brought this whole thing to an end, which is, it's
It
just, I mean,
happens.
it is like a true crime thing. Yeah, because that's how it is in a lot of these. It's like nobody knew until, 3 or 4 newspapers wound up sitting in front of somebody's door, and then somebody finally knocked to be like, hey, is everything okay? And then they realized that for the last several days they got, whatever horrific things were going on inside the house, and just some simple thing got them caught. It's so crazy.
So for serial killers, I think one of the worst things they can do is collect trophy, because that will link them to these people. And it's usually jewelry or driver's license or something like that. And even the people that are really good at covering their tracks, they're compelled to take these trophies. And
Yeah.
in this case, it could be like, well, if I take the finger from this person, it'll have this effect. And if I, it could be some sort of weird cult thing. But it sounds to me more likely that he just couldn't help himself and had to take things to, like, that he could revisit and relive his crime.
Or maybe he thought that he had to have it as some kind of proof that he had done it to reverse this magic. Maybe there was like
As an
energy to it or
offering.
something. Yeah, maybe, because the fact that it was still covered in blood.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he thought the blood had something to do with it. It's hard to understand what his thought process might have been.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of funny. I keep like souvenirs. I'm not going to call them trophies, but I have like random stuff. I have like a prayer bracelet that's like, oh, remember that time I got scammed by some guy saying he was a monk at Millennium Park in Chicago? Like, here's this bracelet from it, or here's this hat from this other thing, or whatever.
Sure.
Like, I mean, it just occurred to me, like, I should be careful what kind of stuff I take, because it can end up looking like trophies if it's just like a date, a city, and then like a bracelet or a shirt or whatever else.
That's good stuff.
So Mallory was arrested and transported to Manila, where he spent 14 years in jail before ultimately being hanged. So I don't really know why back then they would have left somebody in jail for so long. Do you have any idea why they would have done that? It seems like back in the day, it's much more common that if they're pretty sure you did it, they're just going to administer the punishment. Like, there's not, tons and tons of appeals like there would be today, especially for a Filipino transported to Manila.
Yeah, I don't know, man. That's tough, because I think you're right. Back then it was like, okay, well, this is your sentence, let's do this. And it could be that there were appeals. It could be that the church intervened and was trying to do something to protect this guy, because we know that
That
they
could be.
protect pedophiles. So, and it may not be like, oh, he's one of ours, we've got to take care of him. We've got to do, it could be that they're like, oh shit, if he gets put to death for murder, then it's going to be the Catholic priest that murdered everybody. We've got to protect ourselves. But yeah, one way or the other, it could have been the church intervening and trying to push things, and then eventually the government's like, dude, no, he killed a bunch of people, he's got to die. He can go to heaven, but he ain't getting out. So
yeah. So ultimately, the impact of this was pretty bad for like Spanish and indigenous relations. I mean, this was a guy who, he was a priest, but he still believed in this black magic and this superstitious stuff, or what the Spaniards would have deemed as just superstition.
Yeah.
And it was to the point where that, along with probably some kind of severe psychosis, he believed that he needed to kill people to somehow undo this curse and save his mother. And it just kind of reinforced this idea among the Spaniards that the indigenous people were just susceptible to superstition and supernatural beliefs, and that they probably shouldn't be trusted or put into positions of authority. Like, they shouldn't be allowed to govern themselves. Like, it's our burden as the Spaniards to take care of these poor people, because look what this guy did.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty sad in general. I mean, that 50 people had to die, and then the end of it was probably just like, well, these people can't be trusted anyway.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, if he was truly really sick, which I think he probably was,
Mhm.
that kind of sucks. But I don't, if somebody has murdered 50 people, I don't really have a problem with them rotting in jail for 14 years and then getting the death penalty. I mean, it's punishment, and
Yeah,
maybe uh, maybe the prison was his purgatory. Who
yeah,
knows?
could be. But that is all I've got. That's a relatively short, self-contained story.
Self-contained.
Self-contained.
I love
I
it.
mean, it's not. Yeah, there's not a whole lot else to this to go into, but yeah, it's real interesting. I don't want to get into Killer Priest though. I don't want more things to be afraid of. I'm already afraid of sleepwalking, all this other stuff. Like, it's like, if you listen to this and really kind of pay attention to some of our themes, you could come away with a new phobia like every 2 weeks.
Right? For sure.
Like, oh, now I'm worried that my car's going to blow up because it's an EV, and oh, good. Now I'm worried that one of my family members is going to sleepwalk and kill me, and then sleepwalk and hide the body and the weapon.
Right. Yeah. All right. So be warned, we're going to jump around here and there may be some repetition, but we've got a lot of stuff to cover. So just bear with us. So, wild men. Wild men are believed to inhabit a few secluded regions in the eastern south central coast of Vietnam, spanning from Quang Nam to Phu Can, as well as in 5 provinces within the western Trong Son Range, which would also be known as the Annamite mountain range, I would assume, is what we're talking about. So, due to the effects of wars and other factors, their habitat has significantly decreased. There are thought to be 2 types of wild men in Vietnam: the great wild man and the small wild man. Their ranges may overlap in Dak Lak province. So, what I'm going to be going over here with the great wild man and the small wild man is information from a paper that was published by Jeff Meldrum and a couple of scientists that are from this area that I really don't think I can say their name. So we're going to start with the Great Wild Man. So the local names include, you ready to laugh? Nguai Rung and several others I have no hope of pronouncing. So the
That
Great
sounded
Wild
pretty good to me.
Well, yeah, I can fake it, but the people, I'm hoping there's people in this area that listen to the podcast. They're going to be like, stupid American, but oh well. So the great wild man is reported to stand between 5'11" and 6'7". That's what was in the paper. I'm assuming that they got, I know they obviously went to the area, so I'm assuming they got estimates from people that had allegedly witnessed this thing, because I think it would be easier to just say between 6 and 7 foot tall. But anyway, so their bodies are said to be covered with long red brown or dark brown hair, except for the face, which has a pink gray skin. The hair on their head is unkempt, reaching down to the shoulder or mid back, and is longer than the rest of the hair on their body. The hair on their back lies flat, while the hair on their belly is parted down the middle from the neck to the lower belly. Their forearm hair twirls up toward the elbow, and the back of their hands and feet are also covered with hair. They have a robust build and a disproportionately thick body. They walk upright and bipedally with a slight stoop and hands hanging down to the knees. Their fingers are somewhat curved. Despite their slow and leisurely pace, they can leap and run very fast when in danger. So next up is the small wild man, and his local name would be Ngoy Rung No. Small wild man is a cryptid reported to be between 4 and 5 feet tall, no tail, which is important, and entirely covered in long gray brown or gray black hair, including the back of the hands and feet. The female's hair is said to be about waist length, while male's hair is a bit shorter. Older individuals have white hair. The face is hairless with light yellow gray or light gray black skin. And I don't know what color yellow gray is, but it sounds unique. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure what that would be either, unless it's just like a very dull yellow.
yeah, it could be. Anyway, they too walk upright and bipedally, but they don't have a stoop, and they can also leap and run quickly when needed. Small wild men are diurnal, with reports indicating 13 daytime encounters out of 15 total cases that they covered, with only 2 nighttime sightings at 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. They're believed to live in caves and forage for food near springs and streams, eating small crabs, snails, and fish raw with no evidence of fire use. They socialize in larger groups than the great wild man, often consisting of 3 to 5 members. Out of the various reports, there were sightings of groups of small wild men twice, a 4-member group once, a male-female couple 4 times, a mother with a juvenile twice, and solitary individuals 7 times. Small wild men are not known to use articulate speech. They communicate through gestures and sound signals, often with monotonous yelling calls. They use rocks for digging and throwing, but show no indication of manufacturing tools. That's also important. Both kinds of wild men in Vietnam are described as not fierce, lacking language, fire use, or tool manufacturing, and are often found near human settlements. Small wild men seem friendly and human like, with locals referring to them as brothers in the forest. Eyewitnesses claim they do not run unless approached and are sometimes seen entering locals' shack. That's kind of scary. I do not want a small wild man or a great wild man in my shack, Ryan.
I don't know why, but when you said small and great wild man at the first, I thought of that MTV reality show Robin Big. It just feels like some kind of skit or something they try to do on there.
Right. So
Like,
so some of the things that we talked about that were important is that they do not have tails, right? So monkeys have tails. When I say
mhm,
monkey, it's important to distinguish the difference between a monkey and an ape. And there's tons of different monkeys out there. They all have tails. Apes do not have tails. Apes would include us, chimpanzees, gorillas,
mhm.
orangutans, billy apes, bonobos, and I'm sure there's some out there that we haven't discovered. I believe that Bigfoot would be an ape.
Yeah, seems like it.
So they show no evidence of manufacturing tools. They'll take a rock to dig or whatever, but they're not creating tools, right? Whereas a chimpanzee will take a stick and break the limbs off, like break the little twigs off the side and
Mhm.
lick it and stick it in a tree
Like an
trunk.
anthill.
Yeah, or yeah, termites or whatever, and pull it out and eat right off that. Now, it's not, forging steel, but it is using and it's altering something to make it useful to it. So,
Yeah.
in my mind, that's going to be creating a tool. So, moving on, and this is separate. So that's all you get from Jeff Meldrum's paper because a lot of it was just very scientific, as you might expect from someone as well educated and all that as Mr. Meldrum is. So now we're going to, I guess, kind of cover a similar story. This one is the Batutut, which is a great name and it's fun to say. And I think your kids will love to say it. So let them know. The Batutut, also known as the Ujit or the Nguyen Reung, sometimes referred to as forest people, are cryptids and they're similar to Bigfoot and they're believed to inhabit the Vu Quang Nature Reserve and other inhospitable areas in Vietnam, Laos, and even in northern Borneo. So, Vu Quang, now when we think of national parks in the States, we think of like Yellowstone, and uh, it's it's easy to travel around in Yellowstone for the most part, but there's parts that are probably almost completely inaccessible. And that is kind of the definition of the Vu Quang National Park. And this is This is in the Ha Tinh province of the north central coast of Vietnam. The park's known for its biodiversity and is a remote forested region where several new species of deer and antelope have been discovered since the 1990s. That's important. Deer and antelope are big and they're not smart and they're seen all the time. I can go on a hiking trail and see deer almost every time I go. So
Yeah.
it's these are things that have not been discovered until the 1990s in this area. So that kind of demonstrates, I think, how remote and how difficult it is to find things here. So I'll go over a couple of the animals. So one of them was the saola and the giant muntjac. Some newly discovered species are so recent that the scientific descriptions are still pending and they often have local names. So I'm going to have to jump around a bit here. So the Vukwang ox is also called the spindlehorn. They have found what they call the Asian unicorn or Vukwang bovid, and it's one of the world's rarest large animals. They have the slow deer. Now, these are things that have been discovered since the 1990s, and a lot of them even in the 2000s. So there are Quang Kem skulls, which is this slow deer, and they have been sent to a university in Copenhagen where they're being studied by a man named Peter Arctander, who has so far been unable to relate them to any known deer species. As a result, its taxonomic status remains undefined and no binomial name has been assigned. You have the giant muntjac, the world's largest muntjac, right? You know about the
Yeah.
muntjac. You've got the black deer. You've got the holy goat, Lin Duong. This species or a similar one has been seen in Cambodia, where it's known as the Kating Vor or snake-eating cow. And then they have also recently discovered the northern white-cheeked gibbon. So
You're
to
just
put
tackling so many names that if I was trying to compile a story and I had all these terms, I'd be like, you know what? Nah. Or I'm going to feed this into some AI thing and just let that for. I think that's what I should do from now on for mine. I'll just
right,
feed all those weird names into like the Google pronunciation thing and just
yeah,
clip that audio and drop it in.
that'd be good. Yeah, give a little
Yeah.
comic
Just
relief
want
too.
to give you a little praise.
Let me give you the best example, Ryan. The largest cave in the world was discovered in this area in the early 2000s. The biggest cave
Cave.
in the world was just discovered there within the past 25 years. That's pretty crazy. There's
Okay.
big caves, man.
Yeah.
Big caves. All right. So this is how remote it is, right? This is just an illustration of like, you find a cave that is the size of a football stadium in the 2000s. Nobody noticed that
Mhm.
before? All right. So, I think I'm just going to yeah, I'm going to no. Let's do this. Okay. So it's been the source of a number of recently discovered mammals by Dr. John McKinnon. McKinnon claims to have first observed traces in 1970 that led him to believe a hominid similar to Meganthropus lived there. In contrast, Lauren Coleman, who's a well-known cryptozoologist, believes that the Bututut is a surviving population of Homo erectus or Neanderthals. The book, published in 1975 by Dr. McKinnon, In Search of the Red Ape, describes his experiences and findings. A 1947 sighting by a French colonizer refers to the animal as l'homme sauvage, wild man. Vietnamese scholars refer to the animal, as we've said, Ngoi Rung, forest man. It's described as being up to 6 feet tall and covered in hair, as we've said. And this is other people. One of them is a scientist that are seeing these things, and it's not just some villager who's telling you a colloquial story or something like that. So they observe that this creature walks on two legs and has been reported both alone and in small groups. And so it's been seen collecting food. We talked about some of the other stuff that they eat, but this creature is said to attack and eat langurs and even flying fox. So those are
Hmm.
pretty good size animals, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
flying fox is huge and terrifying. So, yeah. And they said that it will occasionally kill humans and tear out their livers. So there's that.
Just a side note.
Yeah. So
Just say it, by the way.
a professor Tran Hong Viet from Hanoi University, a researcher, reported in 1982 having found footprints similar to those that McKinnon described, measuring 11 by 6 inches, for which he made molds. Now, 11 by 6 inches by no means is a big footprint. 6 inches is pretty darn wide, but I mean, you could have a human with an 11-inch foot. Now, we are talking about people that generally aren't going to be over 6 foot tall and have huge feet, right? When we're talking about the people that live in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia are generally
Right.
shorter and slimmer. So he was conducting an inventory of post-war natural resources, and when he was near Chu Mo Ray, he found footprints. So, and some of our favorite people in the whole world, the Sci-Fi Channel show Destination Truth host Josh Gates and his team went to look for the Batutut, and he met with a local primatologist, Vu Ngoc Than, and examined his footprint mold. Later in Phong Na Ke Bang National Park, Gates' team finds several humanoid footprints and makes molds, which they take back to the U.S. for examination by my boy, Jeff Meldrum. Meldrum called the mold a significant discovery and one of the best pieces of evidence he's seen. Dr. Meldrum is an expert on primate locomotion. His specialty is analyzing footprints and gaits and things like that. So if he's calling this a great find, then I'm rolling with Mr. Meldrum, Dr. Meldrum. So let's talk about the rock apes. So picture this. Gary Linderer, just your average guy serving in the 101st Airborne Division's long-range recon patrols during the Vietnam War. One day, he and his buddies are out on patrol when they spot something. A weird humanoid creature popping out of the bushes. Stood about 5 feet tall with shoulders that he described could probably military press a tree. A face covered in hair and a brow ridge so thick only a caveman could love it. Now, here's where it gets interesting. One of the guys speaks up and he's asking if it's one of these infamous rock apes that they have been hearing about. But someone else shuts that idea down quick and says, no way, that ain't no rock ape, right? No way. How does this person know? Are you an expert on rock apes? How do you know that's not a rock ape?
Rock apeologist.
There you go. So Linderer,
a geoprimatologist. There you go. That's what it would have to be.
Oh, that's great. I love that. So then Linderer stated that it looked more like an orangutan. Love orangutans, my favorite animals, and I'm going to tell you an amazing orangutan story in a minute. But it sounds a little bit more like orang pendek, which we'll talk about at some point. But orangutans have never been in the wild in Vietnam, but locals swear up and down about these so-called forest people that they're still roaming around. And the buzz about these got so loud that both sides of the conflict at the, we're still in the Vietnam War era that we're talking about now. The North Vietnamese even decided to launch a full investigation in the middle of the war. They're trying to figure out if there are legit jungle-dwelling humans running around. So interesting. Yeah. According to a 2022 Daily Star article, Vietnam veterans have recently shared accounts on a Bigfoot Reddit group suggesting they encountered a colony of Sasquatches deep in the Vietnamese jungle that were ultimately wiped out during the war. One story comes from a veteran's son who described his father's experience while hiking through remote Vietnamese jungle on the border of Vietnam and Cambodia. He said, quote, "My father, while in the war, said he saw orangutans deep in the uninhabited jungle of the border of Vietnam and Cambodia, but no orangutans or great apes are known to exist on the Asian continent. He described them as 4 to 5 feet tall, muscular, and looked exactly like an orangutan. The location was remote and uninhabited, potentially never explored by humans until the war. The war changed all that, and I'm afraid these creatures are probably extinct now." End quote. Another user corroborated this story, recounting the chilling experience of another Vietnam veteran who had a similar encounter. The second veteran warned against feeding these creatures, saying they could get aggressive if you ran out of food. He said, I know a Vietnam vet who said he was warned not to feed them because they would get angry if you ran out of food. Despite the warning, the veteran didn't listen and fed them as rations. When the food ran out, one of the creatures became angry and knocked him out. He also described the creatures as looking like orangutans and mentioned he repeated this story to me several months ago. Now, keep in mind, orangutans are in Sumatra and Borneo, at least in the wild, right? I mean, we've got them at zoos, but other than that, like if you see what looks like an orangutan on a hiking trail here in Missouri, it's either an orangutan that escaped from somewhere or it's a. So, all right. Robert Baird. An account from the diary of Robert Baird, a soldier stationed in Vietnam in 1968, recounts a strange encounter involving eerie noises in the night. His unit was at a camp when unfamiliar sounds interrupted the relative quiet. Unable to determine if the source was wildlife or the enemy, a soldier, nicknamed Pancho, went to investigate. He climbed into the communications bunker atop a hill but found nothing unusual. As Pancho made his way back, the other soldiers saw him stop, peer into the woods, and fire several panicked shots from his rifle. He then raced back to camp, visibly shaken. When asked about the incident, Pancho explained that on his way back, he noticed a bush that hadn't been there earlier. As he leaned in to examine it, he says, quote, the bush unfolded and grunted at him, causing him to fire his rifle in alarm. So, pretty crazy. There's a lot of smoke here, Ryan. We have military veterans, we have explorers, we have scientists all saying, and more importantly, we have the locals all saying that these wild men that are similar to Sasquatch or Orang-Pendek, usually quite a bit smaller than what we would associate with Bigfoot, living in this area. So it's not, you're getting these stories from, all over the map. It's not just locals. It's not just a scientist. It's not just Josh Gates. It's a bunch of people that are corroborating each other's stories over time. So I think that adds a lot of credence to that. So this is
it's one of those. I mean, it's just one of those things that I always find really interesting is that we will look into something like we as like a society, or we'll decide like this is worth having a TV show about. It's like, is it possible that these creatures exist or this thing has happened? And then they go and talk to the locals and they're all like, yeah, we've known this for hundreds of years. It's like when they were trying to do Antarctic exploration and whatever, and they would talk to like locals, like Inuits or whatever.
right.
I might be getting the names wrong for Antarctica or whatever.
Yeah,
but a
it's
lot
not
of the time,
Antarctica.
the locals would be like, it'd be like, I know some of the expeditions were lost and they would talk to locals and they'd be like, oh, yeah, we saw their ship come through. We told them don't go that way because this is what happens. Like there's rocks or there's ice flows or there's whatever. And they went that way anyway and they never came back.
Silly locals. They have
But it's
no
like,
idea.
they just dismiss it. They're like, nah, we know what we're doing. Doesn't matter that these people have lived here for like hundreds of years and they know this area, they know the weather patterns. Like we have a ship and technology, like we're gonna go do this.
Yeah, we'll just bust through the rocks. We'll just make a super secret sub and it'll be all good.
It's like, is it possible that there's really this kind of ape living in this area, like this population or this deer that is genetically unrelated to other types of deer around the world? Like, could this possibly be real? They talk to a local and they're like, yeah, who would have known except all of us for hundreds of years?
Right. Yeah, they're like, we don't want to say we told you so, but we told you
But
so.
we did. Yeah, it's like Alfred, but I did bloody tell you so.
Right. All right. So this is super cool. We talk about these wild men not really using tools, not creating tools, right? So
Mhm.
how about this? There is an orangutan, and I'll get to his name in a minute here, but now this is an observed orangutan. We are not talking about a possibility of it being a wild man. We're not talking about it being a Bigfoot, Neanderthal, or anything. This is definitely an orangutan. Researchers in Sumatra observed an orangutan using a medicinal plant to treat a wound. This event marks the first documented case of an ape using a plant with scientifically proven medicinal properties to heal a fresh wound. So, previous cases. Studies have previously shown other apes and animals practicing self-medication, such as chimpanzees chewing the bitter piths of Veronia amygdalina to treat worm infections. Orangutans in Borneo massaging themselves with Dracaena cantlii, a plant with anti-inflammatory properties to relieve sore muscles, joint pain, and swelling. And anecdotal reports also mention chips using poultice-like medicinal plants to treat wounds. So for a poultice, what they're going to do is chew it up, mix it with saliva, get it gummy, and then put it on a wound or whatever. So this documented behavior occurred in the Sak Balimbing research area in Gunung Loser National Park. This forest, I get Gunung Loser, but I have trouble with forested. This forested reserve is jointly operated by the University of Zurich, the National University of Indonesia, and the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior, also known as MP-GAB. How about that? So this park houses about 150 Sumatran orangutans. I'm assuming their scientific name is Pongo abeli, something like that. And this included Racus, an adult male. In 2022, Racus or Racus, not sure, a 30-year-old male orangutan received a deep wound on his cheek and another inside his mouth during a confrontation with other orangutans, which is strikingly odd a little bit to me because orangutans seem to be so peaceful. I mean, I would not be terrified if I saw one in the forest. Like they seem very approachable for a wild animal, like they're just chilling. Like, dude, I'm not trying to kill you. Just let me be. I'm trying to heal this wound. So they saw Racus eating leaves from Fibraria tinctora, a climbing liana known for its bioactive chemical compounds and medicinal uses, including pain relief, fever reduction, and a diuretic. Racus chewed these leaves without swallowing and then used his fingers to apply the mashed up green pulp onto his cheek. He continued this behavior until the entire wound was covered. So Racus' wound closed within 8 days and fully healed within a month, leaving only a faint scar. Researchers suggested that the self-medication behavior could help reduce pain, prevent inflammation, and accelerate wound healing. Orangutans are social learners, indicating this type of behavior might be cultural knowledge passed among the species, which is pretty cool because that means mom and dad and aunt and uncle are teaching these animals, hey, if you get cut, go to this tree, chew this up, and put it on there. That's pretty high functioning.
Yeah, for sure.
The documentation of self-medication in apes suggests that this behavior could have been part of the evolutionary repertoire of the last common ancestors of humans and apes. The cognitive capacity for such behavior might be very old, highlighting the evolutionary roots of using medicinal plants for healing. Really struck me with that. That is beyond creating a tool. How does a species like an orangutan or a chimpanzee figure out that these plants help? Is it something where it seems like it has to be passed on from somewhere. I just don't think that, there's orangutans out there that are like, I have 143 cuts on me. I am going to try 143 different trees. I'm going to chew up their leaves and put each one on the wound, and we're going to figure out if any of these help. You know what I mean?
I mean, we had to figure it out some way. We weren't probably a whole lot more advanced when we kind of figured out how to apply this sort of stuff as medicine.
All right, Ryan, what are your final thoughts on these ape men, Batutut and Goy Rune? What do you think? What's going on there?
I think Batutut is a great word.
Yeah.
I agree with you that everybody out there should encourage their children to say it as much as possible.
Yes.
I have a buddy who we play Pandemic every once in a while. Like before the pandemic, we'd play the Pandemic board game. And one of his favorite things about it, because he's like 45, but is actually just a child, is Djibouti, the city of Djibouti in the country of Djibouti. It's like one of his favorite things to say. Anyway, I buy into all this stuff being real, that it's, some uncontacted isolated like group of apes, or when I say uncontacted, I'm kind of making an assumption that they're more like us because we're seeing tool use and things like that. Just like Bigfoot. I mean,
Well,
Bigfoot is probably between humans and other types of apes in terms of intelligence.
mhm.
But
Well, we're
I,
not
I
really seeing
buy
a
the
lot of we're seeing tool use, but not tool creation.
right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm not yeah, they don't have to be like you said, like forging things
Right, like I
to
could
be
use a drill
intelligent.
press, but I couldn't build one.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great example actually. And one of my phobias, something that kind of scares me, the fact that like I know I can fix like me and Kim were talking about this last night. It's like I know I can fix anything in this house, basically, but I couldn't rebuild it.
Yeah.
I can replace a toilet or I can replace like plumbing components or like I know the electrical setup really well in this house. Like I know where everything is, but it's like I couldn't make new fuses.
Right,
I
right.
couldn't make new switches. Like that would be really hard. Like just if you're ever worried about society collapsing, think about all the tools you know how to use, and then think about how many people you know who know how to make that tool.
Joe
Like that's kind
Rogan
of
has a
scary
great
thought.
comment. I don't know if it was on one of his comedy shows or if he was just proving a point, but he's like, all right, I'm going to give you a fire kit and something to boil water in and a good, fixed blade knife. You go out into the woods. How long would it take for you to be able to send me a text message? It's not going to
Yeah.
happen, right? So, as smart as we think we are, we know how to use tools, but we don't know how to make them.
Well, and just since I've taken us down this road, like when we talk about the alien interrogation video and stuff like that, when we were talking to John about it,
Hmm.
I mean, just because an alien arrives here or crashes here does not mean they know how their craft works. I mean, just because somebody pulls up in their like Silverado does not mean they know how to fix lifters or
Right.
replace an air conditioner like condenser in the truck or whatever. Like they're not going to know how everything works on it or necessarily be able to fix it and manufacture new parts if they were stranded somewhere.
Yeah.
But
Well, I mean,
anyway,
we look
going
we I was just gonna say, I mean, we're not talking about just me and you either. I mean, Jeff Meldrum's one of the smartest people I've ever had the pleasure of listening to speak. If his helicopter won't make it out of the park, I don't know that he's gonna be able to fix the helicopter. You know what I mean?
no.
We're not just talking about random dudes. We're talking about brilliant people that still couldn't make a helicopter. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
but I think that the use of medicine is really interesting. I think it would be great to know if these wild men are using some sort of medication. I think that that's going to be something that we probably won't ever have proof. We won't necessarily have people see. We might have locals see it, but not respected scientists and stuff like that. And we all know, unless you have a degree from a university, you're probably just hallucinating or seeing swamp gas or something. But I do the remoteness and the fact that they have found, like this Kuvang ox or cattle or whatever. I mean, we're talking 700 pounds. We're not talking about, a snake or a spider. So we're talking about huge mammals being found here. And we're talking cows are smarter than people, I think, give them credit for, but it's not like this cattle that was in this jungle is like, I've got to keep myself hidden from humans. They're not having
Right.
that thought process. They're just
I
living their lives and no one found them.
Yeah, I always feel like animals are smarter than we give them credit for. Like almost any animal is smarter than you think they are. Like my dog. I mean, people think dogs are dumb, and in some ways, sure they are. But it's like my dog has this compulsion to bark anytime he sees moving out the window, anything, and he
Yep.
knows that if it's not somebody coming in the house or coming up to the house, I don't want him to do it.
Hmm.
I'm not mean, but like there have been times where I'm like sitting on the couch and the dog's sitting right next to me, and all of a sudden he goes, "Boo!" Like involuntarily, just makes this noise because like a neighbor came out of their house,
Yeah.
and I look at him and he's already looking back at me like, "Shit, sorry, dude, did I
Yeah.
scare you?" Like a
Yeah.
very human expression. But
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
they're not actively trying to hide. I think it's more likely that all this stuff really exists and it's just an area that's not explored very well. Like you're saying, they found the world's largest cave there recently.
Yeah. If you watch the episode of Destination Truth on the Batutu, which I can't tell you how much I love that show. I can't recommend it enough.
It
It's
is
on Roku
actually a great
channel.
show.
If you have a Roku, you can just, I mean, the Roku channel is going to show up, on your home screen. Go to the Roku channel, look up Destination Truth, watch the episode on the Batutu, and you will realize why it's so difficult, because these guys, now they're not, they're explorers or whatever. They're not necessarily like survivalist, right? Like dual survival or Les Stroud or something like that. But they're saying, as they're going through these woods, and I'm going to send you a video of something that they kind of dismissed, but I think that it shows what could be a Batutu. But
Mhm.
they're like, dude, I'm using the night vision. I can see 8 feet in front of me. I'm using
Mhm.
the thermal, and I can only see bits and pieces of heat from 20 yards away. If it goes any
Yeah.
deeper than that, there's no visibility. And that these creatures being smaller, maybe 3 feet, something like that, it would give them the ability to move through this area, this terrain, way more quickly than we could. Not just because of the fact that I'm sure physically it's stronger and faster than us, but just the fact that you got little spaces you got to creep through.
Yeah,
You got to,
it's small. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, even
I mean,
when we
well,
go
I,
hiking
I
in
was just
Missouri, we have to go under trees that have fallen over the
yeah.
trail. We have to crawl over things that have covered the trail. So I mean, imagine if you were in a forest that hadn't been touched by humans, there would just be it'd be a tangled mess.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about there's probably the same instinct that early humans would have had. Because I've read before and I probably talked on here before about the fact that, like, an early group of humans meeting another early group of humans from a different place is probably one of the worst things that could happen. Like, it's something that you should be very worried about because there could be conflict, there could be violence, there could be a spread of disease, there could be taking of resources, stuff like that. Like, there are so many things that could go wrong when you're contacting something you're not familiar with. And if you have these, apes or whatever we're classifying them as being there, if they don't have to interact with people or show themselves, they probably just wouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
just ordinarily animals are like, don't know what you're all about, so I'm just going to leave you alone. And if they're 3 feet tall and able to traverse this terrain that we can't even see through,
Yeah. Well,
like,
that brings up a really good point, because how awful would it be if one of these explorers made contact, right? They see
mhm,
this orangutan-like creature, and this creature decides, like, okay, well, maybe I should touch fingers with them, like just make the slightest contact, or even a sneeze or something, and then these creatures get tuberculosis, and it goes through
yeah. What
their
if they're
their
genetically similar enough to spread something?
yeah, that would be terrible. And I know that's not what any explorer wants, but I don't know. I want to know more about it. I want to see one, but I also kind of just like the fact that, yeah, I believe they're there. And as long as there's no disease or, something tragic or something, I really hope that they can maintain. And I feel this way about Sasquatch, Yowie. I don't want them to be officially discovered, because what happens to animals when we discover it's
Yeah, it
never
tends to be
good.
bad news. You're gonna have big game hunters and stuff like that.
Well, and
But
we're
it would be fun to see Josh Gates like just go into a clearing and there's like this orangutan like creature and he's just like eating a can of like a jar of peanut butter. And he's like, oh, just happens to notice him like shit. I didn't get out of here in time.
No, I just really bad things and
Yeah.
when we're talking about America, in some first world countries, I think things are a little bit different. But what if you own 300 acres right outside this reserve, and
Mhm.
these things are there, and you make $5 a year, and someone says, I'll give you $20,000 if you let me pull one of these
Hunt on your
creatures
land.
out dead or alive. I mean, it could be really bad. And it's we see that with poachers. It's like, well, we'll just make them go to jail for a long time if we catch them poaching. Well, they're poaching because they make 4 cents a week and don't have food. And one of these takedowns of an elephant is going to be their salary for the next decade. So the animals that live in these type of environments are more at risk, I think, than they would be, like in the United States. But I could be totally wrong too. There's probably, there's enough money talks, right? If you pack a Bigfoot for real, that's going to be millions of dollars, right? You can
Mhm.
let people study it. You can let them pay to, whatever, dissect it, do all these terrible things. But I just really hope these creatures get to stay hidden, because they deserve a life. They're not hurting anyone. But we do have a connection, I think, with an animal called I think it's the let's see here. Where is it? Calamanaro, I think. So this is a similar type creature that lives in Madagascar, and they have found fossil records that basically confirm that the first human-like inhabitants of this island were way different. And, with Madagascar kind of developing on its own, there's things there that aren't anywhere else in the world, for sure. We know that. But we're going to cover that on a different episode, because I think it's really interesting and something I feel like you guys would really enjoy. But I guess on that, do you want to tell them what they need to know?
Yeah, you guys know the drill. If you want to help us, share it, interact with it. It helps us with the algorithm, helps us to spread in the way that we do not want things spreading with these uncontacted primates. But you can check out what we are selling at cryptiquepodcaststore.com. You can help us keep the servers on at buymeacoffee.com/cryptiquepi. You can let us know what you want to hear next or what we mispronounced at cryptiquepodcast@gmail.com. And pretty soon we should have a new website up.
Yes.
We've both been working on that, but I've been kind of trying to tweak and figure out the right way to get it to work the way we want it. Should make it a lot easier in the future to just have a single hub to go to where you can be linked to everything.
Which fits right in, because I tried to do a little work on it, not successfully. So I know how to use a website. I just don't know how to build a website. So I can admit that. I'm okay with that. But anyway, Crypt Keepers, just remember, the unknown is not a void to be feared, but a space to be filled with new understanding. Good evening, Crypt Keepers.